Leading off our discussion tonight is Democratic Congressman Eric Swalwell of California. He's one of the able questioners on the House Judiciary Committee because he is a former deputy district attorney himself. Also joining us, Mimi Rocha, former assistant U.S. attorney in the Southern District of New York and an MSNBC legal contributor. Congressman Swalwell, I want to start with something you brought up to Chairman Nadler when it was your turn, and there'd already been one brief recess in the hearing, and so I'm not sure whether this was, you could tell us whether this was coordinated with the chairman or not. But you specifically said, you asked the chairman to consider holding Corey Lewandowski in contempt of Congress for the way he was testifying in that hearing, which I have to say, in any previous Congress, he would have been held in contempt of Congress in the first 5 minutes based on what we saw. What is going to happen with the question of contempt of Congress for Corey Lewandowski?
It's certainly on the table, and I also think the two witness chairs next to him, empty chairs should mean empty pockets, and they need to be fined. There need to be consequences. And and by the way, I could listen to that Barry Burke exchange all day. I mean, he's just masterful, and finally the truth came out. But that's not how an innocent person conducts themselves. That's not how someone who wants to help the Congress understand, what the president did would present themselves. That's how a guilty person acts. And so, the chairman is going to consider contempt, and we're not going to stop it. And Lawrence, I saw, just like you did, the Twitter hot takes on what all this meant. And people said it was messy, it was frustrating, and that's all true. But if the opposite of this is to do nothing and let the president get away with further obstruction, we're not going to do that either. And we have court battles that are ongoing right now. So the president may benefit in the short term from confusing people and telling people to obstruct. But in the long term, there's going to be a cascade of court decisions in our favor, and it's not going to be very good for the Trump team.
Congressman, there is another alternative for the messiness of it, and that is letting Barry Burke do either all the questioning or let Barry Burke have the first half hour and then let the mess follow that.
And it also just, depends as well on the witnesses. We should assume that most witnesses are going to be like Mr. Lewandowski. That's just the Trump style. They haven't had to have any consequences for that as of late. And yes, I think, just like you want more cowbell, give us more Burke. He was very, very good.
Mimi Rocha, one of the things that you don't have in a courtroom is the other side, when in the middle of your questioning, jumping up in all sorts of histrionic ways. If you want to object to something in a courtroom, you better be doing it based on the rules of evidence. The Democrats had not just a witness problem, but they had these Republican members on the other side who were willing to play games at every moment of this hearing and interrupt in any way they felt like at any time.
Right. That's absolutely right. I mean, in a courtroom, you have a judge policing it in the moment. Here, Republicans, as long as they're willing to sort of give up, pride, basically, and look foolish, they can object on any basis for as long as they want. And it broke the flow. And particularly in the first part of the hearing, it really, I think, made it hard for Democrats to get information out. As time went on, I think they became more accustomed to it and were able to use their time.
How frustrating is it for you? I'm just imagining you watching this, okay, as an experienced federal prosecutor. And look, there's bad questioning on both sides. We know the Republicans are just playing a game. But on the Democratic side, there was a lot of bad questioning, ineffective questioning, lost points, not holding to a consistent line of inquiry from one member to another. There were very few members, even on the Democratic side, who you could even summarize what they were trying to do. Congressman Swalwell is one of the very few, which is why we could show his clips. How hard is it for you to just watch that?
Well, it was hard. But, look, I want to be fair here in the sense that, as you said, I think what they needed to do wasn't even hear about the style of their questioning as much as they let the witness control. Mm-hmm. And that was also because of what the Republicans are doing. They needed to take control back. And so that's why when Barry Burke, had a full 30 minutes and is just, as everyone has said, such a skilled questioner. He was able to take control again, and he controlled the narrative and got out the information he wanted and showed Lewandowski to just be a complete liar. I mean, it was so obvious to anyone watching that. And, there were some good points, though, even before Burke. I mean, I think this point about Lewandowski, having said to Mueller that he didn't want to meet with Sessions at the DOJ because of the log, and now he's totally trying to disclaim that. That's a really important point, and frankly, he may have perjured himself about that today because he completely contradicted what he said to Mueller.
And Congressman Swalwell, you also caught him in an inconsistency between the Mueller report and his testimony today.
That's right, Lawrence. So he told the Mueller team, and let's just back up. Can you imagine if Corey Lewandowski acted like this with the Mueller team? We know that he didn't because he gave them so much information. He gave them so much information because there were other witnesses that knew what had happened. But he told the Mueller team that this was the only time he had ever written down something the president told him to do. That's how, important this message was. And then he told us, no, I took notes all the time. I kept every note he gave me in my safe. And again, we showed that inconsistency again to show that he was trying to, reduce his criminal culpability with us and minimize it. And Lawrence, just to defend my colleagues, we have bonded in the last few months over this, and we work very hard to be prepared. And you're right, the obstruction from the Republican colleagues of ours and from the witnesses makes it very hard. But I think this new style of having a cleanup at the end by a skilled litigator like Mr. Burke will help the American people better understand.
And Mimi, one of the things about these congressional hearings is that it's extremely hard to anticipate the kind of interference that the Republicans launch, because they are violating every norm of committee process that existed in the institution. And so when I'm watching this, I don't have suggestions for Chairman Nadler about here's how to fight these guys, because I've never seen any conduct like this before in these hearings. Right. And what they don't have are the rules that you have in a courtroom that you can rely on a judge to smack down a lawyer who is getting out of order. We're discovering the limits of what we thought were the powers of chairman in this process, because they are abusing this hearing process. And there really isn't a way to get them to behave the way they're supposed to in these hearings.
Well, I mean, I think to the extent possible, and I realize, under the procedural rules, you can't completely do this. They have to not engage, right? They have to try to shut it down as quickly and early as possible. There seemed to be a lot of debate going on about, right there in the moment about privilege. I mean, this is a bogus privilege that's being asserted. And so either they should have said from the beginning that they're just going to let him make these bogus privilege assertions, or they're going to hold him in contempt, one or the other. And there seemed to be a lot of debate happening in the moment about whether, it was in fact a valid privilege or not. It's not. And frankly, I think they should hold him in contempt, because otherwise, everyone's going to keep, asserting this. And this is a good test case.
Well, before you go, the problem with contempt is that a prosecution for contempt of Congress is conducted by William Barr.
Yeah.
And so that's what makes, in effect, the behavior in that room unenforceable, because he knows that. Corey Lewandowski knows he can be contemptuous of Congress as much as he wants, and this attorney general will never prosecute him for it.
I think, a lot of these guys on the Trump team, all they understand is money, and for many reasons, a lot of their conduct was about greed. That's why I think we should use the power of being able to fine them. I think that might get their attention.